And here we go. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Tips and Tricks. It's Wednesday. I'm Steve. It's about 2 o'clock my time, and we're going to do some more with gain staging. And this time, I'm going to tell you, the thought process of how I approach each sound in the mix. Because everything we started with, from kick drum and sub to drum beats and synths, they all need some kind of gain work to get the gain staging right, so that the channel is up to the maximum amount of headroom in that channel. We're going to talk about the signal to noise ratio. We're going to review the whole strategy of gain staging. But today, I just want to tell you and show you which plugins I'm actually using on every channel and why, so you get an idea of how to kind of massage your sounds into shape. So that's what it's all about. As always, I'm going to take a couple seconds to get my feed up so I can see your comments, because I want to chat with you and I know you're going to have questions. So let me just click on this live video. Probably going to have to mute this in 1 second. And I'm going to type in the chat, hi, with one hand. Hi. All right, let me know when you get here. I want to make sure that we're in contact, because I love doing live videos, seeing what people talk about and ask, and being able to answer questions on the fly. If playback doesn't begin shortly, try going full screen in Ableton. All right, here we are. And the reason I'm teaching in Live 9 right now is because I'm building this lesson in Live 9 so that all Ableton users can download it on 9, 10, and 11 and do this gain staging exercise in a hands-on guided Ableton project that I'll show you a little bit more about at the end of the workshop. What do I got to refresh everything? Okay, so what are we looking at? Let me play the mix. If you haven't seen any of the other workshops, let's just start at the beginning. I've got 16 channels of sounds, starting over on the left with the low end, kick drum, sub bass, and everything. When you get here, let me know how the levels sound. Kick drum, sub bass are purple because they're the low end instruments. All the drums are light blue, all the drum sounds. And then our synth group is in yellow. You might notice that all the channels are at the same output volume of minus 18 dB. Learning new words already. The track faders or sliders are output volume sliders. This is some review of basic gain staging. And what we're doing with gain staging is starting at the beginning on the input level. Now, the input meters are these little green ones on the left and right side of your effects racks of your devices. So I'm in device view. You know, you do Shift Tab. I made a mistake earlier, and I was referring to these as VU meters, which is not correct. VU is actually an analog kind of meter. For a long time, I called all meters VU meters because I thought, volume, unit, whatever. No, these are peak level meters. And the interesting thing here is that if you look at these two little meters on the bottom left or surrounding the kick drum effects rack, you can see the input meter on the left side is only about 2/3 of the way up. On the right side, after the effects rack, it's up to the top of the peak level meter. So if I turn this effects rack off, you hear a change and you see it drop down lower. So our whole strategy with gain staging is to take every channel in the mix and get the input level coming up to use all the available space on that channel, which means you have a loud sound that's going to come out loud when you turn up the track fader. And when I talk about input, let me just make this super clear. Herman Pearl, overall levels are pretty low. Okay, that's good to know. I was, let me go over here and check my levels. Hey. Thank you for saying that. I was doing a broadcast the other day, and it was distorting and clipping, so I thought I'd be a little cautious on that. But if we can need to go up a little bit, I'll send up my send level a little more. Thank you so much for feedback on that. That's super helpful. So when I'm talking about input level, hey, Matt Schultz, hello. When I'm talking about input level, you know, people who record with mics understand that pretty well. That's like turning up the volume to get the mic loud. Or if you want to think about a DJ mixer, the input level is like when you're bringing in a new record and you hit Q or solo, the top knob is the trim knob. You turn up or down to set the volume of that level, the level of that record to match the volume of the record that's playing in the room. Because you know when you push up the fader on the new record, you want to make sure the beat's going to drop loud and it's going to be the equal loudness of the track that's playing. You don't want to be way too loud and crush everybody. And you don't want to drop it way too quiet like I just did with my live stream. So input level is the level of sound that's going through the circuit, even if you mute the channel. So watch this. I'm going to play the kick drum. We can see that our input level, that's the little green meter on the right. That's up to the top of the peak level meter. Watch this. I can take the channel fader down. That little green meter didn't change. The output level meter got lower. If I take the output fader down, it's like saying I got this whole sound in the channel, but I only want a little bit of it. I can mute the channel entirely, and we still have sound bouncing right there inside the channel. So the kick drum sound is going through the channel, going through the effects rack, all that stuff's happening, and we don't hear any of it until we open up the channel and raise the output volume level. So the whole entire game of gain staging is to have your input nice and loud with a good quality sound that's not distorted, pass it through the channel to the output, and use the right amount of it to get into the mix. And if you want a quick tip right now, I recommend setting your kick drum channel so that the master channel peaks around -12. If your kick drum is playing by itself and you're seeing -12 dB peak limit on the master channel, the chances are pretty good you're going to have enough space to put in all the other sounds and have a nicely balanced mix without going into the red on the master channel. In other words, you'll have enough headroom to put all the sounds up without hitting the limit. And a quick note, another thing people talk about all the time, headroom. The internal headroom in Ableton, on channel 1, I just jacked that up to +6, and that track is peaking or going up above the green into the red. That's okay on individual channels because Ableton has the ability to process that stuff with some technical stuff I'm not going to go into, but you can have your individual channels clipping into the red a little bit. The problem is when the master channel is clipping, it's going to send a distorted sound to your audio interface and your speakers, and you're actually going to hear it as distortion. So the name of the game here is keep the master channel green and your individual channels balanced in a way that makes your mix sound really good, which means loud, clear, drop some bass, all that kind of stuff. Comment from the Matt Schultz. Sometimes useful, especially when you're mixing vinyl, to only use like 90% of the fader because sometimes the gain trim is not enough to get the records the same volume. Yeah, there was even an audio sample on some record from like DJ Vadim or something like that, or DJ Shadow maybe, where there's a guy's voice on the record and he's like, say, you got the knob all the way to the top and that can't be where it's at because someday you're going to want to play a quieter record and you got nowhere to go. So that's the basic strategy of gain staging. We spent like 2 weeks talking about how to measure it, what to look at, what we're doing, why we're doing it, how it sounds at the end. And now what I want to do is just look specifically at what I'm doing on each channel and explain the thought process so you understand how to process your channels with some gain staging tools, like, for example, clip gain, utility, compressor with makeup gain and gain reduction. I'm balancing gain reduction and makeup gain with my hands right here. And then EQ, which is interesting because every time you boost with the EQ, you're changing the gain structure of your whole channel, right? Adding gain affects the gain structure. And then we got limiter, which is also interesting because when you add gain with limiter, you're pushing it up into a ceiling that has a limit. So these are all things that can affect your sound design, your tone shaping, your mix, your gain staging. It's all one big thing. And the ultimate outcome I want you to get in your head is that you have to measure and adjust your levels pretty much every time you do anything in the track. I like to say it's like, it gets to be like using your turn signals when you're driving. You just do it. You don't even think I'm turning on my turn signal. You just kind of look where you're going, you hit the turn signal and go. So after all that talking, what are we doing on the kick drum channel? I'm going to rip through all these channels and even get into the effects rack. So let me just go, and if you have a question, you can tell Matt Schultz and he'll type it in. All right, working on the sound. Let me get over to my push and do this on hand. Gonna undo everything and check the sound out. This is a weird sound. I like to pick sounds for my lessons that have problems so I can show you how to fix the problems. First problem is that kick drum has a nasty tail that's like, it's like a little click at the end of the kick drum. It's like buda, 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 buda. Type in yes if you can hear that annoying click at the end of the kick drum. So my first thing is, I'm going to fix that with a gate. And believe it or not, a gate is part of your gain tools because it cuts the volume out and allows only loud things to come through. What I'm doing is putting it down low enough that the kick comes through, but high enough that it cuts off that tail. And right around there, -17. I can hear the kick drum comes clean. Yep. My automation. One by one, what's happening with the compressor and the utility and everything else? Well, utility, I'm adding 6 dB of gain. And if we can keep an eye on the output here. So why did I choose to add gain on the utility plugin before anything else? Well, with the compressor, the level's kind of low, and I want to be able to get at it with the compressor and not have the compressor threshold way down super low. Okay, so I got the utility gain up. The gate is reacting to what's the utility gain is doing. And now the compressor is getting level at a sound that's easier to work with. In other words, I'm doing gain staging inside this effect rack. The utility adds gain and passes it to the gate. If I bring the utility down, the gate's going to stop working. That just happened a second ago. Oh, gate's closed, not getting enough sound. So the utility gain is affecting everything after it. So in order to keep that gate working, I need the utility gain to be up. Now, compression. My favorite thing to say about compression, super easy, even if you don't really know a lot about compression. The threshold brings gain reduction in to take the sound down, and the makeup gain balances that. All the stuff about ratio, attack time, release time, peak, RMS, everything else about compression, you're always going to have to work with a threshold where the gain reduction happens and brings the volume down as it crosses the threshold, and makeup gain to balance it back up. So I recommend you do compression with one hand on the threshold and one hand on the makeup gain and try to balance it out. Read your gain reduction. Compressor threshold. As I lower the threshold, we've got gain reduction coming in the center of that plugin. And as you hear and monitor the gain reduction, use your makeup gain to balance it out. So threshold coming down. And the idea is that whatever sound is coming into the compressor, you want to pass it to the plugin after it with a little bit better and a nice hot level. You don't want to have your output gain down low and pass a little skimpy weak section of sound onto the EQ. So we add some compressor gain. And now EQ, this EQ, I have these mapped in my effects rack so they just come on. Check that out. So what's happening in this EQ? Are we changing the gain at all? Well, I see a couple EQ cuts on bands 3 and 4. So yes, an EQ cut is going to affect the gain in a slight way. But mainly I'm looking at plus 4 dB down at 127 hertz, which is pretty low frequency. Let's do a test here. I'm going to measure the peak level of this channel with the EQ in, peaking minus 11.7. Let's take that EQ back out. Peaking minus 15.7. Wow, so we're getting, wait, 15.7 minus 11.7. Forget the negative values. If it's just 15 to 11, that's a difference of 4, right? 15 minus 11 is 4. Let's dial this EQ back up. It went from minus 15 on the kick drum channel to minus 11.7. Where did those 4 dB come from? They came from right here on band 2 in your EQ. So you've heard the phrase with EQing, cut before you boost. Cut before you boost is a good idea for so many reasons. The first thing is that that's how you get the best quality of sound from the sound you want and cut off the part you don't want, like peeling a cucumber to eat the cucumber and throw away the peel. But in terms of gain staging, cutting sound makes it doesn't affect the level where it's going to boost everything up and distort it later on. So if you're thinking of cutting sounds first, you don't have to adjust as much of your gain staging later. Or in other words, you can tweak your EQs and dip stuff out and your gain is probably going to be fine. Maybe you push your fader up a little bit. But if your first approach is to grab your EQs and start boosting up frequencies, I guarantee you your channels are going to start overloading. Whatever's after the EQ is going to get a different gain input that's going to kind of mess it up a little bit. And like we saw where my utility gain messed up my gate, if you change your EQ and just boost everything all the time, whatever's down the pipe after that is going to get kind of degraded or not a good sound. I mean, you might be lucky and it might just sound okay. But in general, you don't want to solve problems by boosting EQ. Cut first, and then when you boost, understand that whatever you're doing as an EQ boost is going to add gain or add level in the sound. Matt Schultz says, I almost only cut when using EQ. That's right. That's what you do. So what did I do? I did a little gate to cut off the tail of that sound. I did some compression, not really to compress the sound, but to, okay, I wanted to compress the sound a little bit. I didn't want to make it a whole lot louder. I just wanted to kind of do a little bit of kick drum dynamic shaping. EQ to boost up the low end. And we can see that our peak level meter is bouncing all the way up to the top of the green. And in order to read that on the output channel, let's put our track fader volume at 0. Ooh, now I hear that crunch on the master channel. See that? That's what we don't want. You know what? For this workshop, let me do this. I'm going to turn a limiter on for the workshop level just to make sure your stream is clean. And the fun thing here is that when the kick drum channel is all the way up to the top of the headroom on the input level, and you put the track output at 0, then the output level is pretty much at 0 also. Let's turn that limiter on. Got these macros mapped to work too. Limiter ceiling is minus 0.3, and look at the kick drum channel, minus 0.3. This brings us to the topic of 0 dB, and this is something I wondered about for a long time before I got into audio. What does 0 dB mean? On this track output level, it kind of makes no sense, right? You think 0 would be all the way at the bottom of no sound. Well, no, 0 dB does not mean no sound. 0 dB means the level coming into the channel is the same as the level coming out. All right, so the input level of the kick drum bouncing at the top of that input meter, that's coming through the channel. When you put your track output fader all the way up to 0 dB, that means the whole signal is coming in and straight out. It's almost like bypassing, 0 dB is like bypassing this volume fader and just having the input level go straight through to the master channel without being affected at all. So if I have this fader at minus 29.3, we're taking the kick drum signal, turning it down 29 dB after all of our input processing, and then to the master channel, we're sending out a kick drum signal that's 29 dB lower than what it was when it was just passing through the channel. So 0 dB does not mean nothing. 0 dB means the output is the same as the input. Let me set that back at minus 12. Looking good. This pop filter is a little bit in my peripheral vision. And let me just reset my automation and see where we're at. Okay, there we go. And you can see the limiter is doing a little bit of gain reduction. That's okay with me. Driving a kick drum up into a limiter ceiling is all right. What's going to happen? It's going to clip off a little bit of the kick drum transient. Not a big problem. That's not like a vocal or a really precise percussion sound. So that's okay with me. So let me know how we're doing so far. I just talked about kick drums for 15 minutes. Give me a yes if you're with me on why we did these effects on the kick drum. And I'm going to go to the sub bass and just talk about some problems we find in audio. So let me bypass this sub bass effects rack, play the clip. Oh my gosh, I'm going to even set with this volume output at 0. All right, I love that kick drum sound. I'm pushing up my stream level already. Look at what's going on when I reset the peak level meter. Minus 24. When I look at the input level, that sound is super low. So whoever recorded this sound, Steve, for example, this sound is not a very loud audio waveform. It's not very, I didn't hit the tape hard, as they say, or I didn't record at a very loud level. So how do you solve that problem? Well, we could go into the channel strip and add a whole bunch of gain and everything. But honestly, a really good place to start is with this little slider in the clip view, which is technically called the clip gain slider, okay? I'm going into the info to show you the name of it because you can't see, there's no word that says that, but to the right of your transpose knob, and this is in a new place in Live 11, but you can still find it, there's a clip gain. So if I'm reading my channel and it says minus 25 dB, like let's say somebody gave me a folder of audio stems and they're all quiet like this because they wanted to leave a lot of headroom and be safe. If all the stems in the whole project are that low, I'm going to go to the clip gains, select all the channels, and type in plus 18, just like that, and get something louder that I can work with. So when I'm looking at my input faders on the device view, they're already pretty close to the top, ready to go, and I don't need to do so much processing with my effects units. So first solution I would say is use clip gain to get your audio up to level. If you want to do it with plugins, let me flip on this effects rack, make sure I don't blast your head. Okay, there's our input level on the right, down to like minus 27 dB or something, or on the left, sorry. Input level on the left, very low. After all this effects processing, it's up near the top of the rack. And then after that, I've got a little sidechain compressor for the kick. So we'll just ignore that for the moment. What am I doing inside this effect rack and why? Well, I'm reading almost 0 dB on the top of the channel here. Where am I getting that gain from? 6 dB of utility gain, plus 18 dB of compressor makeup gain, plus 1 dB of limiter gain. That is 25 dB of gain added up across those plugins. And what's it doing? Well, the utility gain is basically working as a mono plugin, boosting up a little bit of level. High pass filter at 40 Hertz just to get the lowest end of the sub out of there. Gate is bypassed. I like bypassing effects units in in my rack. I map these macros to bypass stuff, so it's just out of the way. What is our compressor strategy? Are we even compressing anything? Actually, we're not. You can see there's not, I'm not seeing any gain reduction happening. Matt Schultz, meaty, love it. So in this case, I'm just using the compressor for some makeup gain, and I park the threshold right around the spot where I can see the thresholds hitting, so I know that we're measuring it, and I can see that's where it's gonna start compressing if I wanna compress it. Then I add a bunch of makeup gain and go to my EQ. What's happening with our EQ scale? Aha. We're in the world of the cuts. A little bit of a low pass filter, 2 EQ cuts, and we don't have to worry about the gain. Let's just see what happens if I'm gonna reset these meters. I'm gonna bypass the EQ and see if it changes. Okay, minus 0.81. Now let's turn off the EQ, reset. Huh, minus 0.3. Let's bypass the limiter and see what we get. Okay, EQ off, limiter off. Track peaks at 0.67. Now EQ on. Minus 1.8. So we got almost 2 dB of level by doing some EQ cuts at 135 and 269 hertz. How do you like that? And limiter was adding like 1 dB of EQ. So my strategy here was just basically take that sub bass, get it louder, and I wanted to avoid compression because this bass line has a pulse. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I want that pulse. I really want my low end to be going like whoa, 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 whoa. You know, it makes you feel good when the bass does that. So what I do not want to do strategically, why should I take a cool sound with all that great sound design and squash all those pulses with a ton of gain reduction? That's not going to help your world. So if you hear people talking about, oh, you know, compress your mix to make it louder. It's like, well, yeah, but I mean, then it's going to stop pulsing. It's going to stop bumping. It's going to stop pushing airwaves that hit your body in the big sound system. And it's ultimately not even going to feel that loud. It's going to feel like this wall of sound coming at you, and the speaker cones never get time to relax and come back and push more air. So that was my strategy for that one, is preserve the pulse, don't overcompress the bass, turn it up louder, EQ it a little bit. Basically, the main EQ strategy was actually to low pass filter it and make some space for my other synths on the top. And then I did a little bit of limiter to get it up to a louder level. Now, how about some drums? What do we got? What do you got? What do you got? What do you got? Ooh, that's quiet. Let's get our listening output level up here. Okay, beat 1 channel strip. Kind of a weird drum loop. And we're putting the high frequencies on that one. So before any effects, it is about 2/3 of the way up the meter, and I'm reading minus 15 dB of gain. So our very, very first lazy way to do it is go to the clip gain, type in, you know, minus 15. But since I want to have some fun and do some serious tone shaping on this track, what I want to do is cut out the kick drum of here, because we have a separate kick drum on channel 1. I don't want the low end of this beat at all. I just want the top loop. I want the high end, the hi-hat, and there's a little sound. Boop, 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 boop. Then I think we're gonna cut that out with a notch EQ. So first of all, 3 dB of gain, leave the width the same. High pass filter is huge in this one. What happens if we basically bypass everything else? Let's measure the effect of the high pass filter, okay? So high pass filter in at 4.37, and our gain is like minus 15. And without the high pass filter, it's like minus 12. Minus 15. Yeah, so we're removing a bunch of level by taking out the lows, which supports the theory that low end takes up a lot of space in the mix. So you want to like avoid, yeah, that EQ looks wild. You want to avoid putting sounds, you want to avoid putting a lot of low end sounds in the same track. Like I always say, can't put 2 feet in the same shoe. You can't put 5 kick drums in the same track unless they're happening at different times. If you put them all on top of each other like a big kick drum sandwich, I mean, maybe that's your kick drum sound design process, but when you're at the mix stage, you can't just continually add in, oh, another bass line, that'll be dope, another sub, that'll be awesome. They're gonna stack up, use up all your headroom, and the effect is that your mix is gonna get muddy, it's gonna be all lows, you're not gonna even hear the snare drum on the highs, and it's not gonna sound like a track. I've done that, been there. You don't want to have your track sound like that, especially not when you're hanging out with your friends in the car and you're like, yeah, let me play my new track. Got this new track. You put it on and they're all like looking at you like, what's wrong with your music? Okay, why is that EQ curve so crazy? Let me reset my automation over here. And I'm going to smack this with a little bit of compression. What's going on with the EQ curve? Well, I'm doubling up on the high-pass filter. Where's our little chirp chirp sound? I think it's over there on 2. Getting my key commands for 9 and 10 mixed up. All right, right there, 565. That little clink that goes doot, 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 doot. I don't really want that in the track, but I was feeling lazy. I didn't want to like, you know, resample it and chop it up or like put it into a drum rack and take out that slice and reprogram the MIDI. I just wanted to like EQ that sound out. So I basically did that with a parametric EQ that would probably be better served with a notch. And we did a bunch of other EQ cuts in the mids. And I got to band 8 and added like almost 3 dB of high frequencies. And I want you to know, yeah, that EQ curve is crazy. That is slicing it up all kinds of crazy. I didn't just do that like in solo mode. I basically listened to the drum mix. I identified which elements were coming from what sounds. Like I had a hand clap and some other stuff. And I thought beat 1 is just going to be like a high frequency thing. So that was kind of like my strategy of blending this sound in with all the other sounds. Let's measure what is our level going to be without that EQ in there. So pre-EQ, minus 1.8, minus 2, yep. And post-EQ, oh, minus 2. Oh, wow, we just gained 2 dB of level by boosting 2 dB on this high shelf. So you can cut a bunch, but when you boost levels, it's going to add to the level of your overall track. The point is, when you're mixing and you're keeping your mind on gain staging, EQing is going to affect everything else after it, and it's going to affect the levels in your mix. So if you are boosting anything with EQ, be aware that it's going to affect your gain staging, and think about it like salt in your food. If you're adding salt over here and then salt over on this and salt in the sauce and salt on everything, you know, your whole meal is going to be way too salty because you're just adding little bits all the way along the whole thing. That's a basic plan for what I was doing with EQing and compression on drums. And again, I wanted some compression. I didn't want to like completely smack it. But, you know, I give it a good couple of dB of gain reduction. Let's listen to what our whole mix is doing again, just to refresh our ears. And I'm going to mute our synth pals here to give you an idea of what the layers are in this mix. And these drums are not mixed yet. They're all at minus 18. I did that for this workshop. And I wanted to show you that this is a mistake I see in the forums where people say, I did my gain staging, all my tracks are at the same volume, how come my mix doesn't sound right? Listen, gain staging does not mean putting all your faders at the same level. The only time I really see people do that is in live sound, where they want to have, like if you have a bunch of different bands coming and your goal is to be able to put a mix up and put it down quickly, what they do is it's called mixing at unity, where you have your fader outputs at unity and you do your gain staging on the input knobs so that you can always push your faders up and you know the mix is going to come out sounding good for that venue at that time with that sound person, with that mixing board in that situation. There's no real practical reason to try and have your faders all at exactly the same level. I've seen people try to talk about this in the forums and it doesn't make sense. You can either have your output levels all at the same number and change all your input gains, or you can do proper gain staging, put your inputs up loud to maximize your signal to noise ratio and get the best quality sound, and then use your output levels wherever it feels good to make the mix work. So I wanted to cover that in case anybody's trying to do this thing of like forcing your faders to be at the same level and you think you're gain staging. That's really not what it's all about. Unless you're mixing 20 copies of exactly the same sound, and then yeah, they would be at the same level. So we were talking about what plugins we use on which sounds and what situation. I want to talk about the toms because I remember this sound, I had a different approach to it. Check out what's on this track. Okay, I see some empty space. What's going to happen? All right, a little bump. There's another one of those. And I wanted to mention this one because this is one of those annoying sounds to work with in a track where there's mostly empty space and then this one thing comes through that's like, oh, it's actually kind of a bassy sound and kind of annoying. Let me bypass my effects. We'll listen to that one more time. Get ready. Ooh. So it's a floor tom. There's a bunch of level on there. And you can see our input levels are pretty high, but that sound needs some EQ and everything. So I'm really going to work on it here. Not using any utility gain, but we are using some gate. To just kind of take out the empty space in between and just cut off the tail of that a little bit. So it's more percussive, like bump, 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 individual hits. Next, over to the compression. Not hitting it too hard, 5-to-1 ratio, short enough attack, or long enough attack that the transients are coming through, not squashing them off at the beginnings. The heart of this sound, what we're doing is EQing it. So let's bypass our EQ. Let's bypass our limiter. Measure what we got. Minus 17. Now we'll jack our EQ back in, and I think it's going to be minus. Let that play through one more time. And then it goes up like at least 2 dB to minus 15. So we added some EQ boost with a low shelf, did a couple of EQ cuts at resonant frequencies that were getting in the way, and then added a little bit of limiter gain. Getting some ideas from that backward sound. Yeah, reversing sounds is always a good idea. Now, I think I had some stuff in here that was loud enough that it did not really need any gain staging treatment. What was that? Maybe it was the hand claps. All right. Nice loud clap sample. This is kind of what you want to see when you're working with new audio. Maybe not clipping like that little piece might be, but a real healthy audio level. So when I just play the naked sample by itself and I look at the input level with no effects on it, that's pretty much up to the top of the peak level meters. It's a very usable sound. All you have to do is bring your faders up and down to work with it. But me being me, I wanted to tweak it a little bit. So I put on some high pass filter to cut out under 500 to get rid of that kind of boxy, like nasty kind of resonance. Take some of the heaviness off the bottom end, and especially the gate. This sound was going on a little too long for my brain. The tail of those was kind of long. So I dialed up that gate to cut off the end of those claps, make them nice and crisp, and keep it working. And then I thought, hey, what happens if I compress this? What's going to happen? And this is like a texture kind of thing. I put a short attack time. I want the claps to sound short in duration and squashed. I don't really want it to be like such a sharp attack that it like makes you blink like a real high frequency thing in your ear. It's okay for me if this sound gets kind of squashed down because it's by itself, it's on its own channel. I can squash it down and then blend it in with the other drums, and it's going to serve as a percussion kind of level, but it doesn't need to be like, if it was in a whole beat loop with all these other sounds, I would not compress it that hard at all. Then with our EQ, subtle, not really a huge EQ. Main thing that's happening is on band 4. Matt, let me know if you can hear the difference between the gain on band 4 when I put that up and down. Oh, much better. High pass back up to 500. So what we're doing is basically going through a channel strip. I don't need to adjust the gain on this sound because the sound by itself was fine. So really all I have to do is not mess it up, right? I don't want to like push it way up so it starts to distort or cut a whole bunch of gain out of it. So this illustrates the point that as you pass the signal from one plugin to the other, you want to preserve your gain staging even within one effects rack. So the gate is cutting off the duration of the sound, but the level is the same. The compressor is doing, it's hard to read the exact amount of gain reduction, but I'm going to guess it was about 3 dB there. What I'm looking at is the output level to make sure that the output of the compressor is up near the top of the peak level meter to give the EQ, or the next plugin in the chain, a nice healthy level. And then we can read, and you can always read your peak level meter at the end of the chain. If you want to know what one plugin is doing, look on the right side of your effects chain and just ask, is the plugin I'm using doing something bad to that peak level meter that I don't want to see? So if I bypass my EQ, you can see that peak level meter is still in shape. And then just for fun, let me illustrate how limiters can let you put in the exact amount you want. Let's put in 1.43. Ceiling minus 1.43. I'm going to set my track output at 0 so we can read the exact level. Now watch when I dial in the limiter. What's our peak level? Minus 1.43. Oh, if you have the limiter last, you can dial in the exact ceiling you want for that channel. And then it's going to stay there. So no matter how much gain I jack into this limiter, all right. I added 12 dB of limiter gain, and the ceiling is still at exactly minus 1.43, right? Like I put there in the limiter. Let's go all the way and see how bad can we make this sound. I'm going to go to my compressor makeup gain. Ooh, let's see what happens if we add some utility gain. I mean, all right, that stopped being a hand clap a long time ago and turned into something completely different. But the point is, the limiter is a sound shaping tool where it gives you the ability to set the absolute top of how loud that channel is going to be, and nothing is going to come through it. So in terms of sound design, if you're working with saturation and you want to really fuzz out a sound and explore the texture, you can use a limiter at the end to preserve your gain staging, and then anything you do in the channel before that is going to keep your sound usable at that level. So if you're working on a live project and you want to have plugins that you tweak and distort it and change the sound over time while you're playing live and you don't want to think about your gain staging, you can use a limiter to protect your gain staging level and still be able to change the tone using saturator drive, filter drive, anything else like that along the way. I forget exactly what my levels were in this channel. Let me know if that makes sense about the limiter and the sound design. I'm going to put my ceiling back at 0 and turn my limiter gain back down. Brr, brr. Yeah, that was like a crank, crank, crank sound. And in case we're getting too in-depth with a bunch of details, the message of this whole channel is that the claps loop was basically usable by itself. The gain was fine. When I play the raw sample, I can have the clip gain at 0 right here. Play the raw sample, our peak meter is right up at the top of the usable level. That sound is fine. We don't need to do anything for the gain staging. All we have to do is put the output fader up and down to make it sound right in the mix. So anything I was doing with the effects rack is basically sound design stuff to make it sound nicer in the mix. And I used a limiter to protect the ceiling so I could jack up the level with all my other sounds or all my other plugins and keep our gain staging in place. Herman, cool, man. I'll see you later tonight in our meetup. Herman's running Tough Sound Studios in Pittsburgh. If anybody here is listening in Pittsburgh, get in touch with Herman Pearl, DJ Soy Sauce at Tough Sound, because he's doing some amazing work, especially with hip hop, but also with modern abstract jazz or ambient stuff and modular synths, choreography for modern dance. I mean, this dude's all over the place with really progressive projects. So little props to Tough Sound, and thanks for helping me out with everything along the way while I got into the scene in Pittsburgh. Let's look at the clock, do some time staging. It's 2:40. I like to keep these workshops under an hour. What about our slapback bass sound? Let's bypass our effects rack. Let's pretend I never heard this sound before. probably should unmute. Let me stop all my other clips. I'm going to set my track volume to 0 dB. Here's my process for working with a new sound. If I just add a channel and bring in a new VST instrument or a new audio loop or a beat loop or something, here's what I want to do. I like to work with the track output volume at 0. So whatever the sound is, I know I'm hearing the whole thing and I don't have the fader way down. Then I watch my listening level. I got my hand on the mixing board to make sure I don't blast my head. Let's play the clip. Slap some reverb on it. Okay. This sound is coming through and I can hear it. The clip is giving me -18. So the audio file was recorded. Whoever recorded this, Steve, left a lot of headroom on there, a lot of space, the limit of possible loudness. We got a lot of space to go. So the question is, how do I make up gain on this sound? Where do I get extra gain to make it louder? And how much do I actually need? Well, let's check the mix. And I can hear, all right, I got drum beats and synth and everything. So I could kind of hear that sound in there, but let me go through some technical stuff. I'm going to kick in this effects rack. What I want you to look at is the input level meter after the effects. So remember, the first little green meter on the left is the input level of the raw sound. So whatever's coming through the channel, that's what you got. After the effects rack. Ooh, that jumped up a whole bunch. It's even fuzzing in my headphones a little bit. And what are we doing in this effects rack? What are we doing in this effects rack? Hey, what are we doing in this effects rack? What are the decisions and why? So first of all, we saw that our opening level was like -25 or something. So I put in plus 12 dB of utility gain to get that sound up louder. I think that panning right maybe was a little bit of a mistake. Right, I'm looking at the left-right balance on this sound. If you have a sound that's off balance to one side, it's going to mess up your gain on that one side, which can drive you crazy. So in general, it's a good idea to have a balanced stereo field with your instrument groups or drum groups, so your master channel doesn't get totally thrown off. So I want to keep stereo width. I don't want a mono sound, even though it's a bass synth. It's got some nice stereo width, and it's not occupying the space of the main sub. That's on track 2, so this one can be stereo. High pass filter at 70, because we have a sub that's below 100, and I don't need to get sub from this sound. And the gate is bypassed because I don't want to chop any holes in this sound. I like the whole thing. Compression, again, this is a sound that has a bunch of pulses. So I don't really want to squash it to death. If I'm doing one of these, it's riding too low, and I'm not feeling those bumps. It's a very rhythmic sound. Ticka, 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 ticka. Feels a little bit like an arpeggiator, but it's actually coming from a delay on the bass. So I want to just touch the peaks with the compressor to have an idea where they are, and raise up the output. And what I'm looking at in terms of gain staging right now is the output level of the compressor. I'm just going to keep that up until it's near the top of this channel, not up there in the green, just like right around here. So let's say +6 on there. Now the EQ scale. We're at -0.8. What if I bypass the EQ? -1.6. EQ back in, and it goes up. So we must be doing some EQ boosting. Are we boosting anything? Band 2, boosting 3.5, and band 4, boosting 1.7. It's kind of interesting that the EQ boosting doesn't add up to a precise amount of gain. So if you add 3.5 and 1.7, it's like 5.2 or something. You don't get a 5.2 dB increase in level because EQ is boosting different bands. It's not boosting the whole level of the sound. But like we saw with another sound earlier, if we had 6 dB of utility gain and 12 on the compressor and 1 on the limiter, somehow we added up to 25 dB of gain because those devices were boosting the full range of the signal and the gain added up. So in terms of math, EQ boosts don't give you the exact same output level. And you don't have to do math on this. I know music people are more about intuitive feeling. The whole point of gain staging at all is so that when you're done measuring the input level of all your channels, you can grab the output faders, which are just the track volume sliders, mix by feel, and you can be sure that whenever you grab a fader, it's going to have a lot of sound coming through it, so you don't have to push the fader way up high to make your mix. You can grab the faders, mix the way you want, and comfortably mix by feel without having to do any thinking or problem solving or whatever. And what you don't want to try mixing by feel from the beginning. If you skip the whole gain staging concept, you got a bunch of sounds and you just try to take your track outputs and mix. That's what most people do. Well, eventually you're going to come to a sound that doesn't have enough level in it, and you can't get it loud enough in the mix. Like the slapback bass that was minus 25 on the input level. Somebody muted? Yeah, these guys are muted. Let's say I'm just making a mix on my faders, and I want to bring in the slapback bass, which is coming through at minus 25 or something. Honestly, I got the track on channel 13 up at 0, and I'm still not hearing enough of that sound. I got to push my track 13 fader all the way up to the top of the channel strip, +6. I can kind of hear that bass, but now compared to this, I'm going to turn on our effects rack and make up all that gain we were missing, okay? And now I'm going to bring it into the mix. And check that out. Now the track 13 output volume is minus 11, and it sounds louder than it did before. So the whole reason you want to do gain staging in the first place is so you don't end up with every single fader in your mix jacked up to the top, and you're running out, you can't hear it, you know, you're like, my mix sucks. You don't want to be in that situation. You never want to be in the situation where you run out of sounds, like there isn't enough gain, or where you run out of headroom, where there isn't enough space in the mix. Let me know if you have any questions. It's 2:47, and we looked at a couple of things to solve problems in our mix structure using gain staging principles. So like with the kick drum, we had to do a little bit of a gate to chop off the end of the sound, a little bit of compression and limiter to do some dynamics on the transients. And every time we did an EQ boost all day, we added gain that raised our input level to affect our gain staging. So as you're mixing and applying mix decisions, they're going to affect your gain staging. Gain staging is not something you just do once and leave it there and forget it. And it's definitely not something where you put every channel at the same exact level and try to make your track that way. That's not what it's all about. It's a constant process of measuring and adjusting your sounds so that when you get to the master channel, you have a nice sounding mix with still more headroom so that if you need to push up one sound a little bit, you have space to do it. Let's see if that's happening right now. I keep hitting my space bar. Whoa. Oh, see, I have my bass up way too loud. Okay, so here's our mix. And that's a pretty loud mix, actually. That's up to like minus 1 on it. Because our kick and our sub are so loud. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build up a mix from the bottom up right now live to show you how possible it is. And I'm 90% sure that all these channels have the effects racks on. Let me just make sure about that. So we can say gain staging is basically done in these channels. This is what I was building for our lesson. Now I'm going to quickly show you bottom-up mixing. If you have a question or anything, let me know. It's 2:48. All right, doing great. Bottom-up mixing is where you put your sounds all the way down to nothing, minus infinity, and build up a foundation from the bottom coming up to put the sounds in place in the mix. The opposite of that is top-down mixing. Top-down mixing is where you start with everything up, like, you know, like around the middle or a little higher on the mix on the board, and you hear all the sounds at once and then mix down to push some sounds up to the front and other sounds to the background. Why do you pick one strategy or the other? Well, top-down mixing is what I do when I don't know what the sounds are in the mix. So if somebody gives me a track and they ask me to mix it, I have no idea what's there. Are there vocals? Are there guitars and drums? Is it electronic music? I don't know. So I use the top-down mixing strategy at that point to listen to everything, identify what the sounds are, and then gradually pull them down and turn up my amp volume to make a loud track. Usually with top-down mixing, you would do something like take the lead vocal first, EQ it, compress it, put a reverb, put a delay, make it really sound as excellent as you want it to sound, and then fade the other sounds down around it to make it clear that the voice is the most important thing. When do I choose bottom-up mixing? Well, that's where, with a lot of electronic music, when I know what the sounds are, I know what's in the track, I know where it's going, I know every sound that's going to come in for the whole duration. Then I want to build a foundation of low frequencies. So the kick drum and the sub are super important, and I want to start with those. And I'm going to give you a little recipe again. Put your kick drum at minus 12 dB, and that means minus 12 dB on the master channel, not on the kick drum channel, and start your foundation from there. I know from doing this mix all week building this lesson, I'm going to want my sub bass around, I want my sub bass to play around -9. So right now I can hear the kick, I can feel the sub, and if it's not loud enough for me, here's what I do. I go over to my monitors and I turn the level up. You don't get a loud track by pushing the channels up. You get a loud track by turning up the amps in the room, your headphones, your audio interface, your monitors. And to get your audience to do the same thing, they're going to react to the first sound that they hear when they press play. So if they press play and hear a vocal, they're going to go to their stereo, turn up the sound until the vocal sounds right, and they're expecting that everything else in the track is going to fit around that vocal and sound right. Nobody wants to turn up the vocal to where it should be, and then the rest of the song is super blasting loud, or the rest of the song is like super quiet. People naturally adjust their volume of what they're listening to based on how they feel. So a lot of DJ tracks, you know, you introduce a sound with like a kick drum or something so people can beat match with it, and they can set the level right away so the rest of the track sounds good. The tracks that are hard to DJ with are ones with a 45-second ambient intro, like some drum and basses like that, or you know what I mean? And the intro is like, you don't really know how loud the kick drum is going to be compared to that intro. So a lot of times you got to skip through, get to a section of kick drums, use that to set the level, kind of beat match while you're doing it, and then go back and play the intro and fade that up on the fader so you know that when the intro comes in, it's going to be okay to drop the kick drum and the kick drum's going to match. That's a hard situation actually. So whenever, as a producer, if you're making a track with a real long ambient intro, make sure the intro is at the right level that people are going to set their volume and the kick drum is going to sound good. Matt Schultz, Dub Techno, when you're making those intros, you're actually doing this right. You're doing a good job with this. You want to have it so that people can naturally, they can expect that the track is going to sound right when they set the opening volume. We saw this in track feedback last weekend, that somebody had a track with an intro that was very different from the level of the beats. And when the beats came in, we were like, whoa, like something was going on. So I am making a mix, and there's my low end. Kick and sub together are, we still have like -10 dB. So let's just go through and figure out what are the important sounds in here. And notice that I'm pulling up the dominant sounds first. Kick, sub, hand clap, snare. After that, when I have some top loops, guess what? Channel 3, channel 5, kind of in the same frequency range. You know what's going to happen to you guys? We're going to use these for stereo width. So if you have two sounds that are the same frequency range, put them at about the same level, pan them apart to make them sound better in the mix. Let's get these toms coming in the clink loop. Six and seven are kind of accent sounds. Yeah, Dub Techno, man. 1 minute beatless intro and then the same on the outro, which makes it easy for people who don't want to beat match, but it makes it bad for people who are into having it sound right in the volume. All right, tracks 7 and 8, or 6 and 7, I'm not worried so much about them. They are accent sounds that I can move up or down. I know these other shakers are going to be coming in here. Okay. What do these two sounds have in common? What's the same about 9 and 10? Oh, we got Tice. Yeah, Tice Blackout, that is you. Hi. Speaking of stereo width, channel 9 and channel 10, I'm going to solo these because they're both on upbeats. Cha, 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 cha. So two high frequency sounds, both on upbeats. These little fellas are going to get the stereo width treatment as well. And then maybe, interestingly enough, when you pan sounds to the side, you don't need as much of them. So just the simple act of panning a sound off to the side, you can usually bring it down a little bit. All right, keeping it moving on. Now we've got our punctuation marks or exclamation points or the crash and the riser. I think about it like grammar, like this is like the crash is like the exclamation mark at the end. Let's put that nice and loud, and we got a little ocean swoosh. I'm probably going to return to 11 and 12, and I'm going to leave them in the center because they don't happen that often and they're doing their thing. Let's go over to our instrument section. Now, the main idea with the... Do you think that crash is too loud? I think it's a little too loud. I'm going to pull that down. Main idea with the bass line on 13 is it has to blend with the sub and feel like the same sound. So really I'm listening to, and I do this a lot. I will mute everything and get the sub and the top bass line working together. Oh, and by the way, in the group, we were talking about soloing and how to hear what you want when you're soloing. You can right-click on the solo switch, do solo in place, which will let you hear the channel strip as it is in the mix, like with return effects on it and stuff. Kind of useful to know. That comes from the analog world as a workflow. So if you're having something weird when you're soloing, right-click and try a different solo in place option, and that might help you. Strategy right now is I'm isolating the sub bass and the upper bass line in the mix, feeling out where is the level where the sub and the bass line feel like the same thing, like they're pulsing together. Now I'm going to check it without the kick drum. Thinking around there. Group them and glue them. That's a good idea, Matt. Yes, grouping your instruments and gluing them together. Oh, that kick drum feels so good. And check it out. We still have 6 dB of headroom on the mix to pull in our other sounds. What do we got on these pad sounds? Nope, this one. And I love this sound on 15. Matt wants to group the kick in both bass lines. And again, 14 and 15, similar tone, similar frequency range, similar kind of sound. I think we're going to do some pan action on here. Ooh. All right, 14 just got too loud, so 14 is going to have to come down. I think I'm feeling the pad on 14 is going to be atmospheric and just real low. And on 15, I want it a little more centered and a little more dominant because 15 has more rhythm and works with the drums and stuff. And now we can bring in our lead. Now I'm working on the delay on the lead. And what I want is the dry sound and the wet sound to be about the same level in the mix. Let's take that return down a little bit. And this is another one of my favorite things to do is play hide and seek with the lead, where you mute the lead, but you have the effect send all the way up. When you unmute, it goes into the effect return. And you get a nice long trail of echoes. Let's change that feedback time up even more. And And now I'm getting tricky. I put on the infinite freeze on that synth lead. Make it a little bit hypnotic. What's my strategy here? Well, first I raised up the level of the lead synth to sound good on top of the other things in the track. Matt, there is a reverb involved, but I didn't dial it in yet. First I wanted the level of the synth, and I wanted the delay to match. And you want to match the level of your delay first before reverbs, because delay is a copy of the sound, so it's going to double the level of whatever you're putting in. Reverb is not a copy of the sound. No, there is no delay on this reverb. Let me know if you want this reverb effects rack. This is a fun one where I'm doing this plugin called Gain Drop is balancing out for 24 dB of drive on this filter. So there's a high pass filter where I'm driving the crap out of it to make a crunch and fuzz on the delayed sound. And then I had to take the level down -18. Hugo, what's going on? Shout out to Portugal. Yeah, this gain drop delay might be fun to share. That might be kind of cool. So why do you do delay before reverb? Well, delay is a copy of the sound, which means it's going to be louder. So you want to balance that almost like it's another channel, like the delay on return C is kind of like channel 17 in the mix. And reverbs add space, but they really don't have the same level that a delay has. So I leave my reverbs for last. Notice I'm starting my reverb at -12, so as I add in drums, drum reverb, I have plenty of space to go. Scroll sideways. We're gonna go a little over an hour here, but I don't really care. Oops. Wrong send. Let's go on B. What am I doing? Hand claps on A. Okay, I hear it. When you delay, you really... What does Matt say? When you delay reverb, you muddy stuff up real bad. Oh yeah, you don't want to put a reverb after a delay unless you're trying to do some crazy sound design, because delaying a reverb, exactly, you're copying the space into multiple copies, and it's like, ugh. What I'm doing right now is I'm turning up the aux send A, the aux sends on A to put the drums into the reverb. Now I can hear that. And right now I'm putting those single hits in there. Kind of a short, tight reverb. And let's check out what we can do on send B with our bass line. Let's get our reverb return so we can hear it. I just want to touch a reverb on that bass sound. And in this case, this synth reverb is almost like a doubling kind of sound. That's too much. So the reverb is like a subtle addition of space. And you know what can be fun? If you have a reverb you like, you can activate the send from your reverb return and put your delay into it. That's too much. Okay, so there we go. I've been making a mix for about 10 minutes, a bottom-up mix, which means I started at the low end. I started with the foundation of kick drum and sub, made sure the master channel still had at least like 9 or 10 dB of headroom, and then I faded the rest of the channels up around that foundation to make the mix we wanted with some stereo spread. For stereo tips, when you have two sounds, or how do you get stereo? Well, find two sounds that are similar in the same frequency range and rhythm and use those to pan left and right because that gives you an immediate sense of space. Then I faded up my synth group, working with the upper bassline sound. I wanted to match that with the sub so they sound like one unit. And then I did some more stereo spread on my synth pad and leads, or synth pads and pads. And the last thing was to fade up the lead synth on top, which was really easy because we had a nice foundation of everything else. We had tons of headroom, and then we could get into adding effects and reverbs. Right away, I'm hearing that drum reverb's a little too loud. And by the way, also, it's hard to mix reverb in headphones. I find that in the headphones, you usually end up adding more reverb than you should. Somehow in monitors, it's a lot easier to mix a reverb and make it sound natural with the way people really listen to music in the room. So there you go. Matt is saying, yes, delay first and then reverb. Long delay times equal long reverb tails and the other way around. There you go. It is 3:05. I want to wrap this up so we keep it short. Let me know if this was helpful. Give me a yes if you learned something about gain staging and mixing. And while I'm waiting for those comments to come back, I want to show off this session lesson. I modified it for the workshop today, but the basic idea is that this is a guided Ableton project that you download as a live pack. When you open it up, you get instructions, activities, and hands-on examples of everything. So here's what you get in this actual project when you open it, when it gets released next week. Making the first mix. So far what we did was gain staging at the individual channel level. That means we maximized the signal to noise ratio of every sound. Okay, that's Steve talking. So I actually recorded a summary like I did in this workshop. I said, here's what we did. We did the gain staging, blah, blah, blah. There's some fun stuff like, if you get stuck or you have any questions at all, feel free to, you know how to get in touch if you're doing this session on your own. Now, time for the fun part. Let's mix some music. First, let's listen to what we did last time. So I give you activities like play the next scene. Your job is to play the next example and read the master channel level. Okay, let's play the example. And you click on that master channel peak level meter, which I teach you what those meters are and how to find them in the course and earlier lessons. So what we're doing is going through, here's a lesson where I explain top-down versus bottom-up mixing and why you use each one. Here's another activity. Begin with the kick drum. Activity, play the next scene, listen to the kick drum get louder, and read the peak level meter on the master channel. So I'm using automation as a teaching tool in this project. Just like we did in the workshop, I'm going to do things, ask you to listen, point out where to look and read the levels, and tell you why we're doing it to end up with a really good mix later on. We go through synth reverbs, delays, adding melody, adding pad synths, adding the bass line. Check this out. Here we go. I'm going to give you a mix with the low end and the drums all set at the example that I was doing because I think it sounds pretty good and you still have some headroom to add the other instruments. Your job is to mix in the slapback bass on track 13 in the next activity. That's what you do. So it's literally like this workshop I did live, but I'm doing it inside an Ableton project where I tell you what to do, what to look at, and I even give you some specific guidelines. Your turn. Play the next activity and bring up track 13 to put the bass line where it sounds good to you. I'll skip the music right now, but I'm going to give you some numbers here. For me, the too loud setting was like -6 dB. And then I actually talk about what are the numbers that are the answers. So I give you problems to solve in the project and then tell you the answers at the end to make sure you know what you're doing. Hugo is asking, can you send me those audio clips, please, with your voice recordings? Are you going to make a remix of me talking? Yeah, man, no problem. I think I know what you're talking about. And then at every point, I'm going through principles of what we're doing, how to make space in the mix, why we're doing it and everything. What's going on here? Well, the point is low frequency instruments take up a lot more space in any mix. So I'm giving you the thought process of why we're making these changes so you will learn how to do gain staging on your own, in your own projects to make mixes that sound loud and clear and drop some serious bass, and technically they're clean. That's what it's all about. We go through, just like in the workshop, line by line, adding the synths, adding the melody, talking about why melody is important, how is our master level. We go through adding reverb and delay. Pro tip with Reverb Technique, what is that about? Now, I know I kind of threw you into that without a lot of instructions, so let me recommend a technique for setting reverb levels. What you do is fade the reverb down until you can barely hear it, and then mute the reverb return. Aha, that's a good technique because reverb works really well as a subtle atmosphere that tells your brain you're in a space, but it shouldn't be so loud that you're like, oh, somebody pasted a big fake reverb on there. So I'm giving you hands-on practical tips, instructions, activities, automation to see what to do so you get the answers and you know you're making the right mix. And then at the end, we end up with a balanced mix that we can listen to and compare the before and after the starting point. Now, I deleted the automation for this workshop and redid it. So I'm not going to play the before and after, but let me tell you, inside this lesson, it is incredible. At the beginning of this mix, we came in with the gain staging was done at the channel inputs, but all the track output volumes were the same. And it's like, yeah, it sounds like music. I can hear it. But the after mix that we do in this lesson comes out like, oh my gosh, the low end is huge. Everything else is balanced. It feels right. And I even talked about beware of mix creep. I might put this red in the lesson. I was talking about how, your channels get louder and you add sounds and then the delay makes it louder and the reverb makes it louder and then soon you want more kick drum. Well, guess what? If you do your gain staging properly in the mix, you have space at the end. So after all your sounds are in there and you got your mix creeping up, you still have space to put more kick drum. That's like waking up on Sunday night and finding out you still have money in your pocket from the weekend. It's amazing. It's so much fun. It just makes mixing like, I'm just going to put up the kick drum. And you can do it, which is what you wanted to do in the beginning. But after you learn gain staging, you actually end up with a great sounding mix and you can push the kick drum up instead of a rookie mix where you start by pushing everything up higher and your mix sucks and sounds muddy and nothing's hitting and it's like, That's the whole point. Hugo, low frequency takes a lot of space in the mix. Boom. Yeah, I learned that in music school when we were talking about headphone mixes. And my teacher said it like a casual thing. He's like, oh yeah, when you're making a headphone mix, don't put up the bass guitar too loud because bass takes up more space in the mix. I shouted out, I was like, wait, what? Because I was the only one really doing electronic tracks. And so that for me was everything. And the professor looked at me and he's like, what's the matter? And I was like, you just said bass takes up more space in the mix, right? And he goes, yeah, you got to put the bass guitar lower and build your mix up around it because otherwise the headphones are going to be blasting loud and they're going to go deaf and they still can't hear the singer. And I was like, that was the moment for me when I realized, oh, you got to put your low end faders down and then turn your amplifiers up. So faders down, monitors up. I want you to get that tattooed on your brain somehow. Not really, but you know what I'm saying. That's even right in here. FDMU, the one main thing, FDMU, faders down, monitors up. I think I've talked about this enough. These are super cool lessons. They're called session lesson tutorials, which I invented, the technique of teaching in session view with automation for examples and hands-on activities. So you learn by doing it instead of watching people talk on YouTube all day like I'm doing right now. So let me flip to the Mixotexture member site and show you where you can get this course. Doing a little promo right now. Most of the people watching at this minute, I think, are in the site, so you know what it looks like. But for anybody who's new, courses.mixotexture.com. This has some free presets and fun stuff. Introduction to session lessons. If you never did one, you can click on that and get a free one. Completely new kind of Ableton tutorial where you learn by doing it, not watching videos. And scroll down a little bit. Here's a course called Intro to Mixing. Now, this one began as video guides and some PDF downloads that I just gave you, definitions of gain staging, mix tools and techniques, 8 great mix tools, that kind of stuff. It was basically just a little info course of the stuff that I found myself constantly talking about in Facebook groups. And I was like, look, take these comments that you write all the time, make a couple lessons and put them online. That's all it is. But now I'm updating it with hands-on session lesson tutorials where you can download live packs, do hands-on activities, and learn by doing it like I'm showing you in this video. Right now, it's not updated yet. There's a preview module with gain staging terms and tools. Oh, Matt says session lessons are cool stuff. Thank you. And I love Matt Schultz is making some crazy sounds in the sound design world with Operator. He's been doing the essential basics of sound design course and taking it to another level with like Max for Live LFOs and all kinds of stuff. There's even an effects rack in free presets that Matt made called the Matmosphere. I love that thing. So if you're interested in learning more about gain staging, and I know you are because you're still watching, go to the Mixotexture member site, courses.mixotexture.com. Click into the course called Intro to Mixing and Gain Staging, and in the preview module, there are 2 cool videos, gain staging terms you need to know, and gain staging tools in Ableton. And today, basically, I went through the gain staging tools and talked about the thought process of using those tools on every sound. The next step after this is I'm going to upload these hands-on lessons later this week, and the price of the course is going to go up. So if you're interested in doing these hands-on lessons, it's a pretty good idea to buy the course now. It's only $49, and I think MXT, MXT, MXT. Ah, look at that. The coupon code MXT, MXT, MXT drops the price down to $39. Buy this course now because when I add the hands-on lessons, it's going to jump up a bunch more money and you'll get a free upgrade. So if you get it now, you'll be free upgrade it's going to be more than $100, and you'll get all the hands-on lessons for free. Matt's going, oh my God. Yeah. Anybody who bought the course already, you get the automatic free upgrade. So don't worry about that. But it's a good idea to grab this course now. You got the coupon code right there. And I'm going to be uploading hands-on session lessons in doing the gain staging channel by channel, making the mix like we did today, mixing with track groups, like all the drums are going to be in a stereo group, all the instruments are going to be a stereo group. We'll talk about gain staging within the groups and then over on the master channel. And we'll even talk about using bus groups, which you may have seen me do in other sessions, where you've got multiple channel groups going into the buses with the effects coming into the buses. So there's all these cool little packages, and you're basically making like a 4-channel mix of like low end instruments and drums with the effects. And it gets easier and easier. It looks complex, but it gets easier because you have fewer things to work with. You do your gain staging in little sections, and you get little submixes. And every time you make a submix, you're basically getting better at making a mix at all. So by the time you get to the master channel, you're just like, yep, a little more of that, boom, a little more of that, boom, and you're done. That's what it's all about. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So I'm Steve. It is 3:15. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you have any questions, you can drop a comment or email me, steve@mixtexture.com. And grab this gain staging course. Seriously, the link is under this video. This will absolutely help you understand everything you need to know about gain staging in Ableton to make better mixes so your bass drops, so you can have more fun and stop wasting so much time in the studio. Let me just check if there's any comments. Matt, Hugo, thanks for hanging out. We can talk on chat about the session pack with the audio files. I would love to hear you make a tech house remix of this track with some of my vocals. I can just imagine how funny that's going to be. And for now, it's time for me to go for a bike ride. So I'm going to split outside. It's beautiful out. I hope it's nice where you are. And again, drop me a comment. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm here to help. Thank you so much for watching. Next up is going to be Friday night DJ set with some new tracks from people in the group. Send me your tracks. All right, everybody. Love you guys. See you next time.